Radio Times is a British weekly television and radio programme listings magazine. It was the world's first broadcast listings magazine when it was founded in 1923 by John Reith, the then general manager of the BBC. It was published entirely in-house by BBC Magazines from 1937 until 2011 when the BBC Magazines division was merged into Immediate Media Company. History and publication. Radio Times was first issued on September 28, 1923, carrying details of BBC radio programmes. Initially, Radio Times was a combined enterprise between the BBC and the publisher George Newnes, who typeset, printed and distributed the magazine. But in 1925 the BBC assumed full editorial control, and by 1937 the publication was fully in-house. The Radio Times established a reputation for using leading writers and illustrators, and the covers from the special editions are now collectible design classics. In 1928, Radio Times announced a regular series of Euro experimental television transmissions by the bed process for half an hour every morning. The launch of the first regular 405-line television service by the BBC was reflected with television listings in the Radio Times edition of October 23, 1936. Thus Radio Times became the first television listings magazine in the world. Initially only 2 pages in each edition were devoted to television. However, in January 1937 the magazine published a lavish photogravure supplement, and by September 1939, there were 3 pages of television listings. Britain declared war on Germany on September 3, 1939, and television broadcasting ceased. Radio listings continued throughout the war for a reduced service, but by 1944, paper rationing meant editions were only 20 pages of tiny print on thin paper. After the war television resumed and the Radio Times expanded too. Regional editions were introduced. In 1953 the television listings, which so far had been in the back of the magazine, were alongside the daily radio schedules. During the mid-50s Radio Times covers featured television rather than radio more and more, and in 1957 television listings were moved to a separate section at the front. Radio listings were relegated to the back. By the 1950s Radio Times had grown to be the magazine with the largest circulation in Europe, with an average sales of 8.8 million in 1955. Until the deregulation of television listings in 1991, the Radio Times carried programme listings for BBC radio and television channels only, while the ITV published magazine, Times, carried television programme listings for ITV and, from 1982, Channel 4. Today both publications carry listings for all major terrestrial, cable and satellite television channels in the United Kingdom. A number of similar magazines, from independent publishers, also exist. However, the Radio Times still lives up to its name by being the most comprehensive source of UK radio listings in print, and also since the 22 May 2007 edition has carried 2 extra pages of TV listings per day as part of a slight tweak in the publication's format, bringing it up to 10 pages of listings per day in total. Radio Times is published on Tuesdays and carries listings for the following Saturday through to Friday. Since Christmas 1969, a double-sized issue has been published each December containing listings for 2 weeks of programs. Originally, this covered Christmas and New Year listings, but in some years these appear in separate editions, with the 2-week period ending just before New Year. The cover of the Christmas number, dating from the time when it contained just a single week's listings, usually features a generic festive artwork, atypical for the magazine, which since the 1970s has almost exclusively used photographic covers for all other issues. There are several regional editions, which each contain different listings for regional programming. All editions carry variations for adjoining regions and local radio listings. There are now fewer regional editions than there once were because fewer variations in the schedules have led to merging of several editions. The most recent of these is when the Midlands and London Anglia versions merged into one in August 2007. The exception to this process of merging is Wales, which used to be part of a larger Wales West version, mirroring the HTV region. Each day's television is listed over 10 pages or 5 double-page spreads, 2 pages of reviews of highlights followed by 2 pages of terrestrial TV listings, then 6 pages of listings for digital channels. Before digital channels became commonplace, a terrestrial day's television was sometimes spread over up to 3 double spreads mixed with advertisements, but this format was phased out when independent publishers were allowed to publish television program schedules. After television listings were deregulated in 1991, there was strong criticism from other listings magazines that Radio Times was advertised on the BBC, saying that it gave unfair advantage to the publication. The case went to court, but the outcome was that as the Radio Times had close connections with the BBC, it would be allowed to be advertised by the BBC. However, it must be a static picture of the cover, and that the clear disclaimer "Other television listings magazines are available" be given. By the early 2000s, advertisements for the publication had become sparse on the BBC, and BBC magazines, including the Radio Times, have not been advertised nor promoted on BBC television and radio channels since 2005, following a commercial review by the BBC. The latest circulation figure for the Radio Times is 831,591, making it third in the TV listings magazine market behind TV Choice and What's on TV. Color-coded listings. Between June and December 1990, the program page headings were deep pink for films, dark blue for television and a lighter blue for radio. The day was also shown inside colored block halfway down the side of each page, which had a different color for each day. However, these colors were different from those that were adopted in December. The color-coded pages are: Saturday red, Sunday blue, Monday yellow, Tuesday purple, Wednesday green, Thursday magenta, Friday cerulean. In September 1994, the pages had the day's name going vertical and lasted until Easter 2001, which saw the new cover font and the program pages reverting to having the day running across the top of the page horizontally. The channel logos arrived in 1991, when they started covering all channels, but went with the revamp of September 1999, which also changed the primetime listings from 2 narrow columns to 1 wide column, and the layout that continues to this day. Before 1997, the regional variations were at the bottom of the relevant channel listings. In November 2004, the Friday color was changed to dark purple. The Sunday color was later changed to navy blue. Digitization. In December 2012, the BBC completed a digitization exercise, scanning the listings of all BBC programmes from an entire run of about 4,500 copies of the magazine from the first issue to 2009, the BBC Genome Project, with a view to creating an online database of its programme output. They identified around 5 million programmes, involving 8.5 million actors, presenters, writers and technical staff. BBC Genome was released for public use on October 15, 2014. Corrections to OCR errors and changes to advertised schedules are being crowdsourced. Covers. When the magazine was a BBC publication, covers had a BBC bias. Doctor Who is the most represented programme on the cover, appearing on 29 issues in the 49 years since the programme began. Most covers consist of a single side of glossy paper. However, the magazine often uses double or triple width covers that open out for large group photographs, while events such as crafts or new series of popular programs are marked by producing several different covers for collectors. Sporting events with more than one of the home nations taking part are often marked with different covers for each nation, showing their own team. The second series of Life on Mars, meanwhile, was marked by the Radio Times producing a mock-up of a 1973-style cover promoting the series, placed on page 3 of the magazine. In April 2005, a double-width cover was used to commemorate the return of the Daleks to Doctor Who and the forthcoming general election. This cover recreated a scene from the 1964 Doctor Who serial The Dalek Invasion of Earth, in which the Daleks were seen crossing Westminster Bridge, with the Houses of Parliament in the background. The cover text read "Vote Dalek." In a 2008 contest sponsored by the Periodical Publishers Association, this cover was voted the best British magazine cover of all time. Each year, the Radio Times celebrates those individuals and programs that are featured on the cover at the Radio Times Covers Party, where framed oversized versions of the covers are presented. For the past 3 years, Radio Times has published and sold packs of reproductions of some of the Christmas covers of the magazine as Christmas cards. Price: when it launched in September 1923, an issue of Radio Times cost 2d. This price stayed the same until January 1951 when it increased to 3d, although the Christmas number €1 with a colour cover €1 bore a cover price of 6d from 1923 until the final peacetime issue in 1938. The price of non-festive issues gradually rose from 4d in May 1958 to 5d in October 1960, rising to 8d in September 1967 and 9d in November 1969. Wartime and post-war Christmas numbers cost just 2d, before finally increasing to 3d in 1951, 4d in 1957, 5d from 1960, 6d in 1963 and 8d in 1967. For the very first Christmas double issue in 1969 the price shot up to 1/6, increasing to 2 shillings or 24d the following year. For 7 issues from January 2 until February 13, 1971 the cover price was given in both pre- and post-decimalized currency, 1 shilling/5p. Decimal day was February 15, 1971. The price remained at 5p until May 1974 when it rose to 6p. August 1974 saw another 2p added to the cost, taking it to 8p, rising to 10p in July 1975, 11p in August 1976, 12p in January 1977, 13p 10 months later, 14p in June 1979, 15p December 1979, 17p in April 1980 and 18p in July 1980. By the 10th anniversary of decimalization in February 1981 the price had quadrupled to 20p. The start of 1982 saw another 5p added, taking the price to 25p, rising to 28p in August 1983. In July 1984, the year that Radio Times began to be web offset printed and no longer used basic newsprint, the price was increased to 30p. This price was held until December 1985 when another 2p was added. 12 months later an issue of Radio Times was 35p. The price rose to 37p in November 1987, and continued to rise by another 5p every year for the next 5 years, to 40p in December 1988, 45p in September 1989, 50p in September 1990, 55p in November 1991, 60p in July 1992 and 65p in August 1993. The cycle was broken in April 1995 when just 3p was added, taking it to 68p. From January 1996 until March 1997 it was 72p, March 1997 to March 1998-75p, March 1998 to March 2001-79p and March 2001 to December 2002-85p. For the whole of 2003 the price was 88p and for the whole of 2004 the price was 90p. On New Year's Day 2005 another 3p was added and 8 months later 2 more pence was added, taking the price up to 95p. In September 2006 it was 98p. In May 2007 saw an issue cost £1 for the first time, rising to £1 and 10 pennies in February 2008, before returning to just £1 the following month. It rose again by 5p in May of the same year, and then another 5p in January 2009, taking it back up to £1 and 10 pennies. The price remained the same until August 2010 when it was increased to £1 and 20 pennies. Since then the price has risen by 20p once every year. On the week commencing New Year's Eve 2011 another 20p was added, taking the cost of an issue to £1 and 40 pennies, and from the beginning of 2013 the price was £1 and 60 pennies. The cost of an issue from the first week of January 2013, published on December 29, 2012 bears a cover price of £1 and 60 pennies. This then rose again in January 2014 to £1 and 80 pennies. The cost increased by a further 20p to £2 for the issue containing the listings since the first week in January 2015. For the first 3 Christmases after decimalisation in February 1971, the Christmas issues were double the price of regular issues at 10p, increasing to 15p in 1974. Between 1975 and 1978, the Christmas issues returned to double the price of regular issue, 20p in 1975, 22p in 1976 and 26p in 1977 and 1978. 1979 saw the price increase to 30p even though regular issues were still 18p. The prices were 36p in 1980 and 50p in 1981. From 1982 to 1988, prices once again returned to double the price of regular issue, 50p in 1982, 56p in 1983, 60p in 1984, 64p in 1985, 70p in 1986, 74p in 1987 and 80p in 1988. Christmas 1989 saw the price reach £1, increasing to £1 and 10 pennies in 1991, £1 and 30 pennies in 1993 and £1 and 50 pennies in 1995. In 1998 there was a 10p reduction in price, but in 1999 it returned to £1 and 50 pennies, increasing to £1 and 55 pennies in 2000, £1 and 65 pennies in 2001, £1 and 70 pennies in 2002, £1 and 80 pennies in 2003 and 2004, £1 and 95 pennies in 2005 and £1 and 99 pennies in 2006. Christmas 2007 saw the double issue price reach £2, increasing to £2 and 10 pennies in 2008, £2 and 20 pennies in 2009, £2 and 40 pennies in 2010. The Christmas double issue of 2011 cost £2 and 50 pennies, which was more than twice the cost of a single issue. The Christmas double issue cost £3 and 20 pennies in 2013. £3 and 60 pennies in 2014 and was £4 by 2015. Missing issues. For various reasons, some issues were not printed. These include, May 14, 1926, February 21, 1947, February 28, 1947, September 8, 1950, October 13, 1950, October 20, 1950, October 27, 1950, August 1, 1981, April 2, 1983, April 9, 1983, December 3, 1983. Radio Times Guides. Since 2000, BBC Worldwide has published the Radio Times Guide to Films, featuring more than 21,000 films in a 1,707-page book. The 2006 edition was edited by Kilmeny Fane Saunders and featured an introduction by Barry Norman, former presenter of the BBC's film programme. The Radio Times Guide to Films 2007 is introduced by Andrew Collins. There are also similar publications, the Radio Times Guide to Comedy and the Radio Times Guide to Science Fiction. Website. The Radio Times website was launched in 1997 primarily as a listings service. In 2011 it relaunched, offering a diverse editorial product to accompany its listings and television, radio and film recommendations. Tim Glanfield is the current editor of RadioTimes.com. See also: The Listener. Bibliography: Tony Curry, The Radio Times Story, ISBN 1-9003053-09-9, David Driver, The Art of Radio Times, The First 60 Years, Martin Baker, Art of Radio Times, A Golden Age of British Illustration, ISBN 978-1,854,441,713. References. External links. Official website, BBC. A Euro History of the Radio Times, radio programme about cover art with gallery, a selection of vintage Radio Times covers, BBC Genome, Radio Times listings from 1923 to 2009.